All right. Now, you know, I have this obsession about nuclear power. You know, you know, that it's not as good as it looks, as I would like to say, kind of like the Israelis. In many respects, the risks aren't as great as they appear. They're just much, much, much greater than you know. Now, you should take this perhaps with a grain of salt. I mean, you know, you may have different views, but I think what I'm going to show you, nonetheless, is interesting for non-nuclear targets as well. So please endure me or humor me just a little here. Let's go to the next slide. In 1992, I worked in the Pentagon. And because I had an office that had the N word in it, in this case it was non-proliferation, I was asked to brief the Defense Policy Board, which I guess was an honor because I never was asked again. And they wanted to know how many nuclear weapons North Korea had, you know, which is absurd. I mean, nobody knew. I mean, so, all right, I could do a brief on sort of the level of uncertainty, yeah? And I went in, I had my charts, and I sat patiently. Now, you need to understand, this was quite a collection of people. Sitting around the table, the chairman was Richard Pearl. There was former Secretary of Defense Harold Brown, my former boss, Vice President Dan Quayle, Dave McCurdy, James Schlesinger. It was just, you know, quite impressive. I mean, collectively, the amount of judgment that had been exercised spanned, you know, about a century or something. You know, it's so. I was listening to these people, and I think it was Richard Pearl, but I think everyone was part of this. They had convinced themselves that they should write a memo and advise the Secretary of Defense to have the president attack the Yongbyon reactor. And the thinking was, and they argued this, was, well, we can afford to do that because if North Korea does so much as displace a hair of anyone in South Korea, they know we'll come back and flatten the country. And so we'll deter that. So we can take a pot shot at this reactor. And they went around the room and everyone said, yes, yes, yes. It didn't matter what their political outlook was. This is what everyone was convinced of. And they were ready to write the memo. I mean, I don't know whether anyone pays attention to memos from the board, but, you know, it's still, I mean, they're supposed to, I guess, you know. So then they remembered after they had convinced themselves that, oh, I was supposed to brief them for some reason. And of course, you know, I had my slides, but it seemed kind of pointless to me, you know, after this conversation. I mean, you know, this was really something. So I got up and I said, well, I was going to give you my brief, but I don't influential and experienced people with so much judgment. And I wasn't trying to be coy. I mean, I really meant it. And I said, so I've got a question before I give you my brief, if you're still interested. My question is, what if the North didn't choose to hit anything in Seoul, but instead took, you know, their 100 to 300 Scuds and shot them against the 20-odd reactors in the South, or maybe just one of the plants, and got lucky. And they hit something and there was a radiological release. I said, it's my understanding that the prevailing winds are either north or south up and down the peninsula. And then if it goes to the south, it spills over, or I should say to the east. This isn't the south so much as the east. It'll just blow over and you know, radiate a lot of southern Japan. And if it goes up, or I should say to the west, you know, you're going to color all sorts of things in South Korea with radiation. I'm curious, if that happened, would the South Koreans or Japanese blame the North Koreans for that, or us? Well, you could hear a pin drop with that question. Guess what memo didn't go or get written that day? Now, that was in 92, and the Scuds that they had were not that many in number, and they had a accuracy, or a CEP, of 1 to 3 kilometers. Okay, so what are they today? Well, I looked at the unclassified literature, and it's somewhere, you know, at worst beneath 200 meters or 100 meters, or maybe 10 to 30 meters, depending on the missile. Wow. Well, what does that mean? Let's go to the next slide.